Hey listeners, thanks for dropping in. I'm Christy.
And I'm Melissa. And this is Buried Motives, where we dig deep into the details of some of the most gruesome
dirtbag murderers. Hey listeners.
Welcome back to Buried Motives.
Thank you for joining us once again.
And if it's your first time, we are super excited you're here.
We hope you'll enjoy.
We appreciate you listening during this busy time of year. For us, it's graduation season at our house. And it's a fun time, but it's busy.
Oh yes, I remember. We've only done it twice so far, but it is a hectic time for a house.
It is. And I'm recognizing this second time around that so much different when you have a girl.
Oh, that's all I've experienced. It is. It's like you're getting ready for a little wedding.
Yeah. With our son, it was just pick out a suit and we're good to go. But it has been so much fun picking out dresses this time, planning hair appointments, doing all of that fun stuff.
And the dress your daughter picked is gorgeous.
It is a lot of fun. She is a beautiful girl. But it is hard to believe that we will now have two that will be graduated.
I know, we're getting old.
I know. Today, though, we are going to talk about one family's graduation celebration that turned tragic.
Oh, no.
And it is going to be a startling contrast to your case from last week about a dirtbag dad.
I'm glad for that because I still haven't washed Arthur Freeman off of me yet.
She's still thinking about him.
It's more than I'm thinking about Darcy, but I would still like to throat punch him. That's for sure.
I believe you did break out a, I hate this guy.
I did. And I said I was going to punch him somewhere a little further south than that, but I figured maybe I wouldn't say that today.
Well, today we're going to talk about a dad that isn't a dirtbag. In December of 2003, Kent and Tricia Whitaker were feeling all of those same emotions that our family is going through right now. Their oldest child was graduating from university. They were feeling the excitement, the uncertainty of what the future held, and the disbelief that you could actually have a child that old.
Right?
It does make you feel really old.
How do they get older when we don't?
I don't know.
It's sad and wonderful at the same time.
It is. And that's what Kent and Patricia, who went by Tricia, were feeling after being married for 28 years. They had met on a blind date way back in the 1970s, and it was pretty much love at first sight. Within a couple of months, Kent was convinced that Tricia was the one for him. The rom-com continued throughout their whole marriage, and in 1979, they welcomed their first son, Thomas, on New Year's Eve. He was named after both sides of the family and was affectionately called Bart, a nickname for his mother's last name and his middle name, Bartlett. 4 years later, their second son, Kevin Michael, joined the family. The family was well provided for. Kent worked as a comptroller, handling the finances for the family's successful construction business, and Tricia worked as an elementary school teacher. Kent was a successful businessman, charismatic and charming, and Tricia adored the children that she taught, and they adored her. So did the parents. Everyone that met Tricia adored her. She loved her job as a teacher and working with little minds, and when she became a mom, she loved that even more. Her boys became the whole world to her. Recounts from neighbors and friends say that the Whitaker family appeared like the perfect family. Kent and Tricia took pride in their boys and raised them in a religious household. They were active and present in their children's lives, always there to cheer their sons on or enjoy a long-distance bike ride together. As parents, they set clear expectations for how they thought their sons should behave. For over 20 years, the family lived at 1122 Huron Way in the subdivision of Sugar Lakes, an upscale suburb of Sugarland just west of Houston, Texas. Life was sweet in Sugarland, and the Whitakers built a life that most would envy. No one could guess what was brewing under that calm facade. Like all siblings, the boys had different personalities. When we talk about nature versus nurture, I am always amazed at how different siblings can be. They have the same gene pool and usually have similar experiences, so I always find it so shocking when you can have one turn out so good and one turn out so bad.
That is true.
Kevin, the youngest, was described as fun-loving. He was a people person, a sensitive soul who was everyone's best friend. He knew how to brighten a room with his antics at the right times, and he knew when to be serious. Academics weren't Kevin's favorite. He was diagnosed with ADHD and from an early age required extra help focusing. Where Kevin really shined was the sports field. and it didn't really seem to matter which sport. He was a gifted athlete. He and his friends always admired and looked up to his older brother Bart. Bart's personality was different from Kevin's. I have gathered a lot of different people's perspectives about Bart and spent a lot of time reading through essays and journal entries that Bart has written. Some of his writings are very interesting and show clear signs of narcissism that I think sometimes jade the reality of what he writes about. I believe that he is absolutely a manipulative narcissist.
Ooh.
He is very good at telling a story that puts him in the best light, like all narcissists do. They really can't see it any other way. But I have included his perceptions of his world because it is his thought patterns that lead him to commit murder.
Oh, no. You're right. It is incredible how two kids can come from the same parents, live in the same loving home, have those shared experiences, and one can turn out so rotten and the other a functioning member of society.
Yeah, it always just floors me. Bart was described as the smart brother. He would spend hours obsessively reading and was said to have very thin boundaries between fantasy and reality. In grade 1 and 2, he often relied on assuming identities of fictional characters to fit in. From an early age, Bart struggled to feel like he fit in anywhere. He felt like he was different from others. He didn't identify with the way that others processed emotions or feelings. At an early age, it was thought that he might even have demonstrated some signs of Asperger's. He struggled to make eye contact, was hypersensitive to tactile stimulation, and was uncomfortable with reciprocal emotions and affection. Surprisingly, signs of Asperger's in children are similar to childhood signs of narcissism, though. And it often overlaps with antisocial personality disorders like sociopaths and psychopaths.
That is interesting. To be honest, I don't know if I've ever considered a child being a narcissist. To me, that just seems like an adult issue.
Right. It can't be diagnosed in childhood, but those signs and symptoms are still there.
Interesting.
Because naturally, children are just narcissistic until they can develop an outside perspective.
Oh, for sure. And maybe that's why we don't view it as narcissism.
Right. But Bart's view of himself and his world continued long past when he should have developed a perception of how others feel.
The capability of feeling empathy or compassion.
Right. Bart, from his own account, learned from an early age to cover up his true desires and thought patterns to fit in with what he called his, quote, image-oriented family. It just made things easier for him. While to the outside world, Kent and Trish's marriage was one of matrimonial bliss, there were underlying tensions in the family caused by extended family members and the family's construction business. It sounded like both extended sides of the family just didn't get along with each other. This resulted in a divide in the family, and Bart would later say that this feuding had more of an impact on him because he was named after both sides of the family and became sort of a stake to claim for each side.
Oh, is this totally just his own perceived importance? I'm the first grandson and I'm named after both, so they're fighting over me?
Kinda.
Yeah, it sounds a little ridiculous, to be honest.
Well, it sounds narcissistic. He puts himself in the center of everything.
Right, because wouldn't they then be fighting over both of the children?
No, just him, because he carried both names with him.
Right, so his brother's chopped liver, in his opinion.
Well, kinda.
Just not as important.
Right. Bart had a knack for making himself and his vision seem the most important. He did feel like that if he acted in a certain way that would please the Whitaker side of the family, that then he would gain the disdain from the Bartlett side of the family, or vice versa.
Okay.
This angst, he said, was internalized, and he believed that it controlled the way he behaved. So he was always trying to please one person or the other.
So wouldn't that go contrary to being a narcissist?
No, I don't think so, because most narcissists actually care very much about what other people think of them.
Okay, I guess so. But just that drive of wanting to please other people.
Because they care about what other people think about them.
Okay. So it's not to make them happy, it's to make himself look good.
Right.
Okay.
He's very caught up in how other people perceive him.
Okay.
And this perceived family feud led to Bart telling his friends in high school a made-up story about him being adopted. By adopting a new personality, he felt like he could avoid the family conflict. And it also provided a reason for the disconnect that he felt with his family. So he's having these emotions and he's trying to figure out why they're happening.
Well, it sounds like he's very conflicted in his own thought processes.
Oh, absolutely.
Because on one hand, oh, I don't fit in and I have to explain that away. And then the other hand, I'm the little golden child.
Right.
It just seems to be very contradictory, those two aspects to me.
It's actually two sides of the same coin. And remember, this is all from Bart's point of view on how he was viewing the world as an explanation for why he does the things he does. So I think we have to take it with a grain of salt.
Gotcha.
Again, from that narcissistic point of view, he's going to tell it all like he's either the victim or the hero.
Yes, that makes sense.
Adopting a new personality to meet others' expectations was a frequent theme in Bart's life. Bart would later tell a psychologist, Kit Harrison, that he remembered being 6 or 7 when his interests were viewed by his family as being too feminine. He liked to read and shop and, quote, primp. So his father would reward him with a $1 bill if he talked or acted more like a boy.
What?
Yes, that is Bart's recollection.
What?
Uh-huh.
His dad was so worried that he was acting in a feminine way that he was bribing or paying his son to behave more what he thought a boy should behave like?
Yeah, that's what Bart says.
So if you don't brush your hair and just put on a hat, I'll give you $1?
Yep.
Where brushing your hair is just a personal hygiene thing that everyone should do?
Yeah.
So did Bart present more feminine to everybody? Or was this just something his father was hung up on?
I think it might have been something that his father's family picked up on. It was more than just his dad.
Okay.
And Bart felt like it was a huge contrast to how his brother presented to the world.
Because his brother's this big, strong athlete.
Right.
So if you're comparing the two, then he would automatically maybe be perceived more feminine?
Right. And I don't know if his father was giving him money because he wanted him to be more like a boy, or if maybe his dad was like, oh, you're going to a baseball game. Here's $5 for a snack afterwards kind of thing.
Right. It could be his perception.
Right.
Because it's a very archaic way of looking at things too, because that's just suppressing who your child is.
If you talk to Bart, that's exactly what his father was doing. And that's what leads to all this inner turmoil that he has. Bart would say that it wasn't the money that was the motivating factor to change his behavior, but it was the pressure to live up to his family's expectations. I think both might have been the answer.
It's always both.
Yeah. Bart says that it wasn't long before he learned that everyone was happier if he just mimicked what his younger brother Kevin did. Everyone loved Kevin and gave him lots of attention. Bart would continue to say yes to playing sports because that's what Kevin did, even though he secretly wished that his poor performances would teach his parents not to ask him to play. Bart would later write, quote, I began to strike out on purpose, hoping that every year would be the year that I would finally be able to convince my parents that there wasn't any point. But I couldn't tell them that I didn't want to play because I was afraid that not liking sports meant that I wasn't living up to what they expected of me. But playing ball was hell for me. I had to make it look like I was trying, but failing. Instead, it was more batting lessons and a better bat. Every time I missed the ball, or the basket, or whatever, it was my little secret middle finger to everyone.
Wow. That's actually really sad that he didn't feel like he could just say to his parents, I don't want to play. And I can see his parents being like, wow, our son is terrible, but we don't want to tell him you're too bad of a player to keep playing.
Yeah, it would be a catch-22. But Bart put this pressure on himself, thinking that he needed to please everybody so that he was the good son.
But then you would think maybe he would try, because then he's purposely trying to be a disappointment with his performance of that sport.
What he would do was he would play to please them, but he would make it look like he had even less skill than he actually had, hoping that they would just say, oh, this isn't worth it.
But what parent say that if you think your kid really wants to play ball?
Exactly.
You're going to go there and cheer them on even if they strike out.
And that's what his parents did.
Oh.
Yeah. As a coping mechanism, Bart described learning to become a chameleon, being whatever people wanted him to be. Becoming a chameleon, Bart said, kept him from wanting to end his life. A thought he had often, even in elementary school, because he was just so conflicted of who he was as a person.
Oh, wow.
He claims that being a chameleon led him to be very confused about his own identity. But at the same time, it also seemed like he developed a great deal of pride in the fact that he could fool everyone. A feeling that he would become addicted to. A feeling of being the smartest guy in the room. It was as if that became his secret identity under all the different masks that he wore.
Ooh, that's a little scary.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is where you really start to see the narcissism come out. Bart would later say that he would often play the super charismatic or confident, outgoing type, even though on the inside he was extremely confused about who he was, and that he often felt a lot of anger towards himself because he perceived his inability to fit in as his true self.
Okay, that makes sense. But then that also means that he was a very disingenuous person, that you didn't even really know who he was.
Exactly. While Bart felt it was difficult to live with this dual nature, he admitted that there were advantages to being a chameleon. By pretending to be what everyone wanted or needed him to be, Bart learned that he could easily manipulate them into believing his lies and doing what he wanted them to do. By the age of 13, Bart says that he had developed about 15 different versions of himself and was a con artist. He later explained this by saying, quote, "By the time I went to middle school, I was a loner. I didn't want to be, but I didn't know what it took to have a real friend. So I tried different things, different masks, if that is the word you want to use for them. We all do this, to a certain extent, and sometimes we don't even know it. But I knew it. We acted different when we were at work versus when we were at the club or at church. Eventually, I found certain attributes that produced positive feedback, humor for one. Making people laugh staved off the loneliness. I felt I could fit in, even if only for short periods of time." He went on to say, quote, "But the desire to be accepted only increased with that small taste. The poison took form in those days. Perfection brought happiness. All I had to do was look at the magazines and the TV to see that perfect people had friends and had love. So if you are stupid or ugly, what do? Well, you cheat any way you can. You do anything to keep the world and those you care about from seeing how sad or pathetic you are. It's not my parents' fault that they didn't see the signs because I was an expert at covering them up. It was critical that I kept the secret from them. I thought I would certainly lose their love if they had even the slightest idea of who I really was. So I never let them or anyone see. Growing up, I had never felt love because deep inside, I knew that the kid my parents loved wasn't the real me."
That is heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
And how exhausting for him to always having to be bringing in the information as to what he thinks people want and molding himself into that.
It would be exhausting.
It would.
Bart came to view the world only, though, from his own perspective. He couldn't view it from his parents' perspective, who actually loved him just how he was.
I know you'll probably talk about it, but is there later mental health diagnoses with him?
Yeah, several.
Okay, because I'm thinking this sounds more than just being a narcissist, even though he clearly is one.
Bart comes to view the world from his own perspective, and he built lies that he told others, and ones he told himself that allowed him to justify his own version of the world, whether it was based on reality or not. But hero or victim, he was always the main character, twisting facts to fit whatever tale he was telling. His ideas about himself became more grandiose as he tried to build himself a personality that would make himself and everyone else happy. On the outside, Bart was living a believable lie. He said, quote, "The better I got at impersonating a human being, the better I fit in." His confidence, more often than not, was considered cocky, and he appeared to make friends easily, leading others to believe that he had it all together. On the inside, Bart said he felt the exact opposite, not even ranking himself with human beings.
What?
He learned to suppress any emotion that might surface to keep up his chosen persona for the day. He once attended an Odyssey of the Mind challenge for the state of Texas, where he broke out in a cold sweat, not wanting to go on stage, but he forced himself to go into autopilot to meet the expectations of his team. It was just one of the times that Bart describes purposely squashing his true feelings and creating a mask to deceive people around him. And he took pride in the fact that he could just trick them into thinking that he was just like everybody else.
Where truthfully, everybody else does have moments of feeling insecure and frightened. We're not all confident and outgoing. We all will sweat sometimes when we're on a stage.
Right, but Bart couldn't see any of that happening from anybody else's perspective.
So any kind of humane emotion that he experienced, he just took that as a negative and a weakness.
Yes. This coping mechanism for him was a two-edged sword. While it made Bart feel better in the moment to pretend to be something he was not, it actually ended up confusing him about his identity even more, and he soon became resentful of the work that it took to fit in, of the constant feeling that he had to be perfect. That constant self-loathing was difficult to bear. He later wrote, quote, "I began to hate. I saw everyone as happy. even if they really weren't, and I hated them all for it. I couldn't figure out why something so basic was missing from me. Later he explained, quote, "The hate never went away. And though you mainly hate yourself, there are limits to how much you can hate yourself, and it spills over onto other people."
Oh my goodness. That is a true statement.
You can only hold so much hatred in.
Right, before it does start spilling out everywhere.
Yeah.
So do you think this task of him of always having to be someone different, did that stem from his father wanting him to be more masculine? Is that when it started?
Bart thinks so.
Okay, that I had to change to please my father, and then he's like, hey, I can actually do this and please everybody.
That's right.
Okay, interesting.
But anybody looking from the outside of the family didn't think that the parents were overly demanding of perfection.
Okay.
It doesn't sound like it was the Menendez brothers kind of thing.
Right. Oh, yeah, that's a case.
It is. And Bart makes a connection to it later on. But for Bart in his teenage years, while attending Clements High School, he said something started to happen as the hate took over. He pushed boundaries and rules and began using drugs and partying. He also started to push the outer limits of his lies to see just how far he could take them. I think it might have made him feel more in control to be able to manipulate people, and I think there was a lot of comfort in it for him, and that became his true identity.
Okay.
In high school, he told his friends that he was training for military intelligence operations and was in a unique government program for spies that was only available to highly intelligent students.
Of course, that's what a teenager is going to say to sound cool.
Yeah.
I'm a secret spy.
Goes along with all of his other secret identities.
Yeah, it just seems
juvenile.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. He just needed to make himself more important than everybody else.
Right. And a spy would feel that way because people don't know you're spying on them. You have the upper hand.
Mm-hmm.
So it's so fitting that that's what he was telling everyone.
Yeah.
But then guess what, Bart? You're not a secret spy if you tell everyone you're a secret spy. Hence the word secret.
But he just couldn't keep it to himself because if nobody knew about it, then they wouldn't know how much more important he was than them.
Right.
Right?
Even though he was not a secret spy.
No, he was after feeling more important than them.
Right.
His family and his school didn't pick up on the fact that at times the different personas that he was developing were almost to the delusional level. Some critics have pointed out that Kevin, his younger brother, received numerous supports from school and from his parents to cope with his learning difficulties. But because Bart performed well academically, he fell through the cracks and wasn't treated for any of his emotional difficulties.
And he was masking them, so how would they know?
Mm-hmm. But the kinds of things that he was telling people were very clearly delusions.
Right.
Because he was believing that he was in this secret program for spies. In high school, Bart began planning burglaries and talking other students into executing them with him. He would break into schools and steal electronics. Ironically, the things that he was stealing were all things that he or his parents could afford to buy. They were an affluential family that could afford all the nice things. And Kent and Tricia always made sure that he had the best toys and cars. They were buying him luxury vehicles. He had all the best electronics. It does make me wonder what the motivation was to provide their son with so many expensive gifts. I wonder if they were just wanting to give him everything because as a parent, you just want your children to have everything. Or if they actually noticed that he wasn't feeling as loved and that he didn't fit in as much as his younger brother. And so they were buying him all these things to compensate.
That definitely could be. My guess is that they did feel some sort of disconnect with him. And that is a way to connect with somebody. Some people, their love language is gifts. So especially if the parents had that love language, they would feel like, I can show my child love by providing him with these things.
Right. Because it did seem like they had an idea that Bart wasn't coping as well, or that he may not feel like he was as important as his younger brother.
Right. And we do know that often things like burglary, that type of thing, isn't about obtaining those items. It's the rush. It's the thrill. It's
the seeking attention.
Yes.
And very clearly, that's what it was in this case.
Mm-hmm.
Because Bart didn't need any of these things.
It's the same thing when you see a celebrity shoplifting. When they've got a big fat bank account, they could pay for the pair of earrings, but they're shoplifting it for a totally different psychological reason.
Right. Bart would say that part of the thrill of stealing was to see if he could actually talk others into doing it with him and to see if he could get away with it.
Yeah, now that checks.
Mm-hmm. His little experiments resulted in expulsion from Clements High School and a conviction for a string of 7 different burglaries in the fall of 1997 at the age of 17. In a psychological report done at that time, Bart was described as having clinical symptoms of a delusional paranoid disorder, but he wasn't started on any medication because the doctor felt at that time that the testing was probably wrong because it was designed for adults and Bart was only 17 at the time.
That's pretty close to being an adult.
Yep.
That's splitting hairs, I think.
It is fascinating to me that they wouldn't actually start treating him for this and that he had this diagnosis, but they're like, oh, the test was probably wrong. So we're just going to ignore all of that. And he didn't receive any help.
That's terrible,
Yeah.
especially if 18 is what they perceive an adult to be, because that means we're talking months away from being a quote unquote adult.
Yeah, it is bizarre to me. But for whatever reason, that's what they went with. And he didn't receive any help. There are reports that Bart had suffered a closed head injury in 1995 while playing sports, and he had lost consciousness, but it wasn't deemed at this time to cause significant impairment. And so they didn't think that was leading into what was causing his behaviors or his poor judgment skills.
Okay. Well, there was indication of that well beforehand.
Yeah, he would go on to have a head injury a couple years later, and again, it was pretty minor, and they didn't think that it would cause any significant impairment.
Okay. They didn't notice a change in personality. Mind you, they weren't seeing his real personality.
Right. It would be hard to pick up with Bart. Because of the expulsion, Bart was enrolled in a stricter religious education program at Fort Bend Baptist Academy. This was not a good environment for Bart. The stricter expectations further drove his view that he must be even more perfect and created even more pressure to create more personas in him.
Wow. It's interesting because he has this drive to be perfect, yet he wanted to break into schools to the point of getting expelled. That's not being perfect.
No, the persona that he broke into the schools with was one that he had created for his teenage buddies.
Right.
And to be perfect among his teenage buddies, he had to be the leader that was thrill-seeking with them.
Right.
And so that persona was perfect for them.
That makes sense. So kind of a Jekyll and Hyde thing going on.
Mm-hmm. With many, many different people. He literally was a chameleon that would just create personalities based on whoever he was with that day.
That's a scary person to be around.
Yeah, but he's also getting off on it because he's tricking all these people and he recognizes that he can start to manipulate them.
Right.
By being somebody that he's not.
I wonder if that's why people who are pathological liars lie, getting that rush of having people believe you.
And it's thought that Bart is a pathological liar.
Clearly.
During high school, Bart had a couple of casual girlfriends and one serious relationship that carried on to his university career at Baylor. Despite this woman's love and support, Bart began to believe that she was only in love with a fake version of him, and so he sabotaged the relationship by cheating on her with men and women. Later, he would convince himself that his mom had never approved of this girlfriend, and that had led him to sabotage the relationship.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And how would you expect her to love the real you when you're not letting her see the real you?
Oh, the girlfriend had not even a chance, but it seems like he was like this perfect boyfriend.
They're never perfect.
No.
If they're perfect, that's a red flag.
Yeah.
None of us are.
No. I did find it interesting that he blamed his mom for him sabotaging his own relationship. Blaming others is a huge trait of a narcissist, and it was an attempt by Bart to not have to take responsibility for his own actions and allowing himself to avoid more self-hatred. In post-secondary, Bart's behaviors became more bizarre and reckless, and the difference between how Bart was feeling on the inside and what he presented on the outside grew farther and farther apart. Bart claimed that it was during this time that the hatred that he felt for his existence reached a boiling point. Later, he wrote in an essay, quote, "I knew that there were definitely people responsible for me having to be alive. A single night of passion, I reasoned, and I have to go through this. I'll never be what they want anyways. I decided that it wouldn't really trouble me if most anybody in my life were to drop off the face of the planet. Sometimes I wanted them to. And then I realized that what I really wanted, more than anything else, was revenge for being alive. As soon as this thought was born, it had a life of its own.
Goodness.
Those are his words.
That is wild.
Yeah.
I'm thinking how you said you think he's a sociopath at the beginning. That sounds like it fits.
Mm-hmm. Bart describes what started as an idea about how much better life would be if his family were dead so that he didn't have to gain their approval, to fantasizing about their deaths. Quote, I wanted revenge for being invisible. I wanted revenge for being me. In a very real way, though, it was all just a sick fantasy, a desperate attempt to bleed off the pressure a bit. If I thought how easy it would be, I relaxed a bit. They, meaning his loving family, became the scapegoat for all the troubles in my life. Over the next couple of years, his hatred for them grew as he blamed them for everything he felt was wrong in his life. It didn't sound like once the dirtbag thought about how he could control his own behavior, stop his own lying, practice some self-discipline, or even reach out for help. It was just all about how all of these other people had wronged him.
And you can see how that would just grow over the years, because I'm a firm believer that you see what you look for. If you're looking specifically to see how someone is ruining your life, you're going to find things, even if they're just what you are perceiving, even if they're not reality.
Mm-hmm. And that's what Bart's doing. I don't believe at this time he actually had the ability to see anything past his own perspective.
Even though he was able to reflect introspectively later about it.
Right.
That is interesting.
Mm-hmm. His writings afterwards are fascinating.
Huh.
But at this time in his life, he couldn't see that he needed help. Instead, he just continues to make fake identities. His fake personas were numerous and charismatic. They attracted both men and women, and his confidence was bolstered by his use of drugs, including meth. The drugs made him feel more competent and socially apt, even when he developed impotence from their use.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Okay, we won't keep talking about that. I was like, oh, I could go off on that, but...
I did find it really interesting that the drugs were causing impotence, but he was still getting such a high off of them and feeling like such the in crowd that he just continued to use it.
Yeah, you would think...
If you wanted to feel like a man, you wouldn't want to be impotent?
Well, not just as a man, but that how your confidence is growing when something else isn't growing. Because for a lot of people, a lot of men especially, not being able to do that would make you feel less than.
Right.
I'm assuming.
Yeah, you're not a man, but
Yeah.
She has to make that assumption. Yeah, that's what I thought was so interesting, is that even with him being impotent, that he still continued to feel confident because he was tricking people.
And that just shows you how important that feeling for him was, that he was willing to sacrifice that part.
Right.
At all cost, any cost.
His duality in the life that he was living led to the development of an alter ego named Sebastian Cole. It was a character that had once existed in the books that he had read as a child. Sebastian Cole was a con artist in books that could manipulate others easily. The drugs and the increased delusions about his identity made attending school difficult, and he ended up transferring from Baylor University to Sam Houston State University, and then he eventually stopped attending just altogether, although he never did tell his parents. Instead, he kept up the facade that he was attending school so that his parents would continue to pay for his lakeside condominium in Lake Conroe and his Yukon SUV. He later wrote, quote, "The emptiness inside of me just kept getting bigger and bigger. I tried to fill it with drugs and philosophy, sometimes both. Nietzsche and crystal meth could make anyone hate the world. I began to work out a bit, and I got into martial arts. And that helped for a bit, though most of my senseis knew there was something wrong with me. Most people freeze up in a fight. I smiled." This whole time, his parents and his brother had no idea that Bart blamed them for his existence and that he had become consumed with thoughts about their deaths.
That is an unnerving thought.
Mm-hmm.
That your child could be constantly fixated on killing you and you have no idea.
Yeah. They wouldn't find out the true extent of his hatred for them until December 10th, 2003. That night, the Whitaker family gathered for what they thought was a big celebration. Bart had told them that he had just finished his exams and that he was going to be graduating on the honor roll. Excited about Bart's accomplishments, the family went out to celebrate at their favorite place, Papado Seafood Restaurant 10 minutes from the family home. Kent and Tricia, like most parents, expressed that surreal feeling that Bart would actually be graduating. They weren't totally oblivious to Bart's struggles. Tricia in particular knew he struggled, though not to the full extent. But both were happy and proud of what their son had accomplished, even though they were still a little surprised it was actually happening. At the restaurant, Bart was gracious and polite, excited about the $4,000 Rolex he had received as a graduation gift from his parents that night.
Ooh, you weren't kidding. They did have some pocket change.
Yes, they did. Bart chatted casually with his brother, smiled and joked around, all the time knowing what was waiting for them when they returned home. While posing for a family picture, Bart slyly gave his family the finger, his true feelings being captured forever in that picture.
No way.
Yeah. I'll show you the picture after. It is crazy.
Wow.
Yeah. And his brother are gathered on their fireplace and he's giving the camera his finger. Like he looks like he's crossing his hands in front of his lap, but he's got his middle finger up.
Wow. That is something.
The tenaciousness of it?
Yes. They're here literally celebrating you. And you have the nerve and the gall to flip them the bird without them knowing.
Yep.
It's just so conniving.
It is.
Little dirtbag.
Mm-hmm. When the family got back home that night, Kevin got out of the driver's seat of the family's Chevy Trailblazer and was the first one to reach the family's front door. Tricia, 51, was right behind him as he unlocked the door. Kent, 54, held back a little while, waiting for Bart because he said he needed to grab his cell phone from his Yukon that he had previously parked on the street. He was a good dad, just waiting for his son. And I think he was probably not wanting him to feel alone.
Right. It is a nice gesture to wait for somebody.
I just felt like, here's a dad not wanting his son to feel left out. He wants him to feel protected. He's just waiting for him.
It is.
As 19-year-old Kevin entered the front door, he was greeted by a masked intruder in the home standing less than 10 feet from the door by the stairs. The shock of finding someone in their home pointing a gun at him must have seemed so surreal because Kevin actually smiled before he was shot in the chest, still gripping the car keys.
What? Okay, so he's come in after him. Like he's not already in the home or he's in the home? Did you say he was in the home?
No, I didn't. Hold on. You'll understand it.
Oh, he went around back and got in.
Let me go on.
Okay. My brain's like, wait a minute.
What happened?
Rather, he already shot the dad and he came in the front, or he went to go get his phone and actually got in the back and was in the house.
I'm surprised you haven't heard this case. Tricia was entering the home right behind her son and only got as far as the entryway. She only had time for a brief exclamation before she too was shot in the chest and dropped right in the doorway. Ken said he heard the 2 gunshots, but he didn't have time to register what they were before he too was shot in the chest. This was an upscale neighborhood where crime was practically non-existent. One of the cops actually said when he was receiving the reports from the 911 operator that he thought it was a joke because crime just never happened in this neighborhood.
And so was the father shot in the driveway area, or he had come running to the house and was shot?
Well, he was standing on the porch by that point and had been at an angle to the shooter. So when he was shot, it wasn't a direct hit. The bullet entered the left side of his chest about 6 inches from his heart, and it became lodged in his right shoulder.
But he's standing outside of the home.
Yeah, he's standing just on the porch, just outside the doorway.
Okay.
Bart was the last one shot. A bullet entered his left arm. Kent, who had always been a religious man, immediately started praying about how he was okay to die as long as the rest of his family was safe.
Oh.
At this time, he still hadn't grasped what had happened. His thoughts were consumed about his family's safety. A neighbor, Cliff Stanley, came running when he heard the commotion. As he came up to the Whitakers' front door, Kent was there alive and told him that he was bleeding very badly, that they had all been shot. The neighbor quickly took off his shirt and pushed it into Kent's chest, trying to stop the blood. Next, Cliff went over to Tricia, who was struggling to breathe.
Oh.
He asked her what happened, and all she could say was that he shot us. Cliff saw Kevin lying on the floor, and even without approaching him, he knew that the teen was dead. The last person he saw was Bart, lying in the living room. Bart was calling 911, just like Cliff was doing. The police and emergency personnel arrived at the scene very quickly. Trish was life-flighted to Memorial Hermann Hospital, but died a short time later. Kent and Bart were also taken to hospital. Both required surgery, but both survived and were able to be released 4 days later. Cliff had been right about Kevin's injuries, and he was pronounced dead at the scene. The community was shocked by what police initially called a burglary gone wrong. What had happened was unthinkable. It was just not the sort of thing that happened in Sugarland. Laying in his hospital bed just hours after being shot, Kent struggled to grasp what had happened to his family. Kevin and Tricia were dead, and Bart was seriously injured. He said his mind at first was consumed with thoughts of revenge. But as he recognized the darkness that was consuming him, he began to have a spiritual experience that encouraged him to forgive the shooter.
People like this are remarkable to me.
Yeah. At the time, they didn't even know who the shooter was yet, but he was already willing to forgive him. Ken said that it was a profound and life-changing experience, and not one later that he could turn his back on, even after the truth would reveal the ultimate betrayal. As Kevin and Tricia's funeral was attended by over 1,000 people, police tried to put together the crime scene that didn't make a lot of sense. Initially, they had thought that it was a burglary gone wrong, but on closer inspection, that didn't hold up. Many big-ticket items like electronics and jewelry were not taken, and very suspiciously, all the drawers that had been apparently rummaged through were neat and tidy on the inside, and all had been pulled out to roughly the same amount of distance.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the crime scene photos were almost laughable if it wasn't such a tragic scene, because all the drawers were pulled out just perfectly aligned, all of them only 2 to 3 inches. It was crazy.
That is, it was way too neat.
Yeah.
And someone who is going to ruthlessly shoot 4 people is not going to be carefully opening the drawers.
No. It was almost like they had a ruler. Like if you see the crime scene photos, it was ridiculous how uniform they were.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't have like a stopper on it so you couldn't slam the drawer closed?
I didn't read that. No.
Wow. And if it's only a couple of inches, you're not even using that much energy to whip open that drawer.
No.
If I was going to be staging it, there'd be drawers on the floor.
Mm-hmm. But there was none. The only thing that they found on the floor was a pillowcase in the master bedroom.
Really?
Mm-hmm. The crime scene got even more peculiar when they found the murder weapon, a 9mm Glock handgun that was found on the kitchen floor next to the back door, actually belonged to Kevin. The gun had been in the safe that was tucked away in a crawl space at the back of Kevin's room on the second floor of the house. The safe had somehow been found and then pried open. Blue paint was left on the safe where the metal had been dented and twisted to gain entry. Police felt like the remote location of the safe ruled out any stranger had just happened upon it.
Yeah.
They came to the conclusion that the robbery was staged and that most likely the suspect is someone that knows the Whitaker family very well. Well enough to know which kind of ammo to bring for Kevin's gun. The bullets left in the chamber and the 4 spent bullets found at the scene were all Corbon ammunition. This was a different brand than the ammunition that Kevin kept for his gun, and no other ammunition of this brand was found in the house.
Oh, yeah.
So the people that were coming actually brought the ammunition for the gun that they just happened upon in the house.
Maybe they had a whole jacket full.
Yes.
You know, in Sesame Street where he opens the coat and there's all the watches or like whatever.
Whatever you need, we have it right here for you.
Would you like to buy an O? Round and complete.
Fort Bend County Sheriff's Department called in their nationally recognized scent discriminating bloodhounds, Quincy, Columbo, and James Bond. Oh, how great are those names?
They're wonderful.
For detective dogs?
Perfect.
That was awesome. Their handler, Keith Pickett, tracked his dogs from the rear of the residence where Bart had told the police he had chased the gunman. Each of the 3 dogs tracked the scent back to Bart's Yukon parked in the street in front of the house. This is where police found a black leather glove next to the curb, right beside the Yukon. Scent swabs were obtained from the black glove, the murder weapon, dresser drawers in the master bedroom, a pillowcase that was lying on the floor of the master bedroom, and the damaged gun safe in Kevin's room. The only fingerprints detectives found in the residence belonged to Bart and his family. Kent and Bart were questioned separately. Both were angry when they were questioned and appeared confident and that they had nothing to hide. They both identified a single intruder that was wearing black clothing and a black ski mask. Each had seen the man fleeing out the back door as Bart had chased him. But where Kent was sure that the intruder had been a white man, Bart said that he thought the man might have been black. This was just one of the many red flags that police had about Bart's story. While Kent was super detailed about the night of the shooting, Bart was very vague and unsure about his answers. Sergeant Slott, the lead detective, said, quote, Bart was very guarded in his words. He wouldn't commit to anything. And this was perceived by the police as being really unusual. I'm guessing that Bart probably didn't want to mix up all the lies that he was telling about this night. And vagueness in a lie allows you to backtrack later or claim that what you had said was misinterpreted. So that's why he was being so vague.
Right. But he's this little chameleon where he could just play and pretend to be an innocent person.
Right. He's created this perfect scenario.
For as much thought as he's put into this, he was not very smart on how he went about it.
No, he wasn't.
Thankfully.
Mm-hmm. While they were following leads, police get a tip from a reporter who was digging deep into the breaking news about this family being shot and trying to find out more information about the case. They had learned that the family was out celebrating an upcoming graduation and had contacted Sam Houston State, where Bart was supposed to be graduating from. When they had contacted the school, they learned that Bart was actually on academic probation. In fact, Bart only had enough credentials to qualify as a freshman at the school.
That was good investigation work.
Yeah, it was really digging deep. And then when they found that out, they passed it along to the police. There was no way that Bart was graduating, and especially not with honors like he had told his family.
Wow, good for that reporter, because that's something you just wouldn't question. The whole family was literally out celebrating this supposed graduation.
Yeah, and it sounded like the reporter wanted to get like a quote from the school. And so they called and found out, oh man, he's not even close to graduating.
Yeah, we haven't seen him in months.
Yeah. When confronted by police, Bart's answer was, quote, "I wondered when you guys were going to figure that out. Totally unfazed about being caught in this lie." He told police and a very shocked Kent that he was just taking a break from school, that the stress had gotten to him, that he didn't want to disappoint his family, so that's why he hadn't told them, and he planned to go back, so it really wasn't that big of a deal. He even tried to tell them that Trisha had known that he wasn't attending school currently.
Oh, what a dirtbag.
Well, conveniently, it couldn't be confirmed that he had told her or not.
I know. He's saying, yeah, my mom knows, but he's killed her so she can't say anything.
Right.
Ugh.
But I very much doubt that she knew anything, because what mom would pick out a $4,000 watch for a phony graduation gift?
And not tell her husband about it.
Right. Would you even plan a dinner if you knew the graduation wasn't a real thing?
No, because then you're becoming deceitful as well.
Right.
And Trish does not sound like that.
She wasn't that kind of person. The whole thing just doesn't ring true at all. Bart was very quickly becoming the police's #1 suspect. Suspicions were just further cemented when 5 days after the shooting, police received a call from Adam Hipp, a friend of Bart's from school. During a 3-hour interview in a darkened parking lot behind the police station, Adam tells police that 2 years earlier, in the spring of 2001, Bart had approached him to kill his family. Adam draws a map of the Whitaker home and makes a playbook diagram of how the murders were supposed to go down. He draws a stick figure for the shooter in the dining room and 3 stick figure bodies in the foyer. It's almost an exact replica of what took place on December 10th. Right down to the twist where he was supposed to shoot Bart in the shoulder so that he would look like a victim and not a suspect. And this plan hadn't been the first one. Adam tells the police that there had been several different revisions of it. The original plan that Bart had told him had been to set Bart's grandmother's lake house on fire while his family and extended family members slept. In that version of the plan, Bart planned to emerge from the fire with burns to escape suspicion. Adam tells the police that the motivation was money. It was estimated that Bart stood to inherit about $1.5 million if everyone in his family were to die.
And that's 20 years ago.
Yeah, that's a big chunk of change. Bart had promised Adam a cut of his family's inheritance for helping him kill them. The second revision of Bart's plan was supposed to take place on April 5th, 2001. Adam also gave the names of 2 other former roommates, Justin Peters and Will Anthony from Baylor, that Bart had tried to recruit them to help. They had made an attempt to enter the family's home 2 months before Adam's attempt. That attempt had been foiled when the alarm went off unexpectedly, and they all fled.
So they were going to actually kill his family for him?
Mm-hmm.
All of them?
All of them. All admitted that they were willing to participate in this shooting plan for money, and all were curious to see just how far Bart would actually take this crazy plot.
How do you find 3 people in your life that are willing to do this?
Well, he actually ends up finding more.
What?
Yeah, it's crazy. All of these 3 boys came from well-to-do homes. They were all described as good American boys. One was actually a National Merit Scholar. These were not the type that you would think could be talked into murder. All 3 of the boys described Bart as being a master manipulator. Bart had sought relationships with each one of them when they were each facing periods of turmoil in their lives. Justin had just lost a girlfriend in a traffic accident, and Adam and Will were struggling with grades and eventually were expelled from their respective schools. They were strapped for cash, and they didn't want to face up to being exposed to their own families. Each, in retrospect, could see how Bart recognized and exploited their personal weaknesses. Shockingly, police learned that Sugar Lamp had received a tip from Texas State Police in April of 2001 about the potential shooting that Adam was supposed to do. They were tipped off by a friend of Bart's, Jennifer. Jennifer had called the police telling them that Bart was driving down from Waco in the middle of the night to kill his parents. Police took the threat seriously and notified the Whitakers in the early morning hours.
So they did have an idea that this could be coming.
They did, more than an inkling.
And what a terrible realization for those parents to be woken in the middle of the night being told by the police, your son might be coming to kill you.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, Kent and Tricia just couldn't believe what the police were telling them at the time. And honestly, who can blame them? I think most parents would have a hard time believing that this polite, intelligent son that they know would ever want to murder anyone, let alone them, who lovingly raised him and they felt like they had a close relationship with him. Instead, they chose to believe Bart's lies about it all being a drunken misunderstanding between him and a friend. When his parents confront him, because they don't just sweep it under the rug, they call him up and it's like, what the heck is going on here? What did the police mean by this? Bart told his parents that he and a group of friends had been drinking at a party and had all been watching a show about the Menendez brothers. Bart had made the comment while watching the program that the brothers went about it all wrong. He then proceeded to outline to his friends how he would go about it and not get caught. He said Jennifer had misunderstood and thought that he was serious, but really he had just been joking around.
Okay, that's a plausible lie. I don't believe that he was not being serious, but you can see how his parents might believe that.
Well, especially when you want to believe that, right?
Yes. How many true crime fans will watch a show and be like, oh, they were dumb for doing that, and pick it apart?
Right. And it was on par with the personality that Bart presented to his parents. He was a little bit cocky. He was a know-it-all. And so him saying, oh yeah, I figured I could do it better, was how they viewed their son. Like,
right.
That seemed like his personality.
Because he thought he could do everything better.
Right.
Even murder.
Mm-hmm. Kent and Tricia, unfortunately, bought this lie hook, line, and sinker. Tricia's friend would say afterwards that Tricia did have a hard time brushing the worry aside, though, and that she did struggle to completely trust Bart afterwards. So there was some inkling in her mind that she was just unsettled with the whole experience of it. But again, she just couldn't bring herself to fully believe that it was true, that their own son was trying to kill them.
Yeah, that'd be a hard realization as a mother.
Mm-hmm. Even after the death of Tricia and Kevin and Bart's lies about school were revealed, Kent still had a hard time believing that his son would be capable of planning their murders. Police tried to be very blunt about their suspicions about Bart and told Kent that he was in danger if he chose to continue to live in the family home with Bart alone, because they were still both living in the house where the murders took place.
Oh, man.
Yeah, wouldn't that be so hard?
It really would.
Kent said that the very first time he walked into the house, he had to almost numb himself to get past the front door where they all died, but that he chose to stay there because they had spent 25 years there.
All the memories were there as well.
Yeah, he refused to let one bad memory overtake all the good memories that they had had there.
Right. And he already admitted he had forgiveness in his heart, but that would be so haunting. How would you not envision your wife and your son laying there every time you walked through that door?
Right. And I don't know how he kept up with this whole attitude of forgiveness when the police are telling him that, hey, you were living with the person that murdered them. The police were pretty honest about, he's our prime suspect.
Yeah, that would be tough. But as a parent, I can see how you wouldn't want to believe it.
Mm-hmm. Ken said about the police's accusations that, quote, I considered it, but didn't consider it seriously. He promised me that he did not have anything to do with it, that he loved Tricia and Kevin and me. It was inconceivable. Ken says that he was conflicted. He said that he knew the police could be right, but he didn't want to abandon his son either. He said, quote, I thought, well, I'll just work with both sides. I'll help Bart as much as he needs help, and I'll help the police. And if I hear something, then I'll tell them. It kept my neutrality on it. That's big of him.
It really is.
Because he's walking a very thin line. He's trying to make sure that there's justice for his wife and his son, and then be there for the other son that had killed them.
Even though he didn't know 100% yet that his son had.
Right. Police were very certain that he had, but Kent hadn't brought himself to 100% believe it.
And he wasn't arrested yet.
No, he wasn't. He spent the next 7 months living with Bart, trying to support his son, and pretty much disregarding the police's advice about his own safety.
And every month that passed, you would feel a little bit safer. You'd let your guard down.
Well, I think for Ken, it almost went the other way, because he said he started thinking like, okay, there might be like this 10% chance. And then it kept gradually growing and growing as police brought him more and more information. Police continued to try and link Bart to the shootings. They recognized Bart's pattern of enlisting his friends to help, and they started to look at his close acquaintances. They tracked down Chris Brashear and Stephen Champagne. Chris was Bart's 21-year-old roommate that worked with Bart at Bentwater Country Club. Steve lived a couple doors down from them, and Bart had helped him get a job bartending at the club. Each is interviewed and agrees to submit scent and DNA samples. From Chris's scent sample, the bloodhounds indicate a positive match to scents found on the glove, gun, the drawers, and the gun safe. As police are getting closer and closer to making arrests for the murders, Adam makes a deal with the police to contact Bart and record his conversations that he has with him. He does this to avoid any charges for conspiracy to commit murder in the 2001 attempt. Adam reaches out to Bart and tells him that the police have contacted him and that he knows the information about the 2001 murder plan looks a heck of a lot like what happened to his family.
Yeah, identical.
Yeah, so he's calling him out and saying, like, look, they're going to come ask me. Bart agrees to pay Adam $20,000 to keep quiet about it. On April 1st, 2004, Adam receives his first installment of the payoff. A Federal Express mailer with $240 in it is delivered to a post office box set up by the Dallas police. The return address on the envelope is K. Soze and Bart's address. He didn't even change his address up.
What?
Yeah. The name on the mailer is from one of Bart's favorite movies, The Usual Suspects, featuring a villain named Kaiser Soze, a criminal mastermind who walked away from police investigations after committing an elaborate murder. Bart often quoted to his friends the closing line of this movie, which is, "The greatest trick the devil ever played was convincing the world he didn't exist."
Ooh, that is quite the quote.
Uh-huh.
And how eerie in this context.
Yeah. Bart's fingerprints were all over the envelope. This pretty much confirmed Bart's guilt as the mastermind behind the shooting. As police continue to close in on him, the dirtbag does one last thing to break his father's heart. He flees. Bart had told Kent that he was going out to a club one night and never returned. He left with $10,000 in cash from his father's bank account.
Oh.
On June 28, 2004, Bart's Chevy Yukon was found abandoned with the engine running at an apartment complex in southwest Houston, near a hotel where he was working as a waiter. He just disappeared into thin air. Without Bart around, police narrow in on the two other suspects they have, Chris and Steve. They work them hard over the next year, laying out the evidence before them and trying to convince them that it's only a matter of time before they can arrest them. Steve is the first one to crack. On August 28, 2005, Steve agrees to meet with Detective Slot at Starbucks and agrees to talk for a deal. He initially says that he didn't know anything about the murders in advance, and that he had just been asked to pick up Chris at the Whitaker's house and drive him away that night. That he only agreed to dump 2 bags of evidence in Lake Conroe after the fact. These bags would later be recovered using information provided by Steve. They contained a dustbuster used to clean the getaway vehicle, a blue metal pry bar tool, whose paint matched the paint transfer left on the gun safe, a water bottle, from which Chris's DNA was recovered, and several Corbon 9mm bullets.
Jackpot.
Yeah. Steve was given a polygraph test to verify the truthfulness of his statement, and he actually failed. Because it was suspected that he was lying, he lost his previously arranged deal for immunity.
What?
Mm-hmm. He hadn't been completely truthful with them.
Yeah, but we know that's not a science.
It's not, but that's what they told him. And so now, feeling that he has nothing to lose, Steve shares the real version of events with them. It had always been the plan for him to be the getaway driver, and that Chris was the shooter, and the mastermind of the whole plan had always been Bart. Around 4 p.m., the day of the shooting, Bart had told Chris how to avoid security cameras in the gated community and how to get into the house. Bart told him where to find the gun and how to pry open the safe. He had instructed Chris to make it look like a burglary and then to wait patiently for his unknowing family to return. Steve had switched out his own plates with license plates that had been provided to him by Bart and followed the family to the restaurant in his car. There, he watched them have a loving family dinner, posing for pictures, laughing and joking, and then he followed them back home and waited to pick Chris up at the back door as he fled. The two fled the scene with a wad of cash that Bart had told Chris would be in the master bedroom in Kent's hiding spot, and they headed out of town to Willis. Along their way, they changed clothes, disposed of the 2 bags of evidence, and then hit the bar, paying their tab with the money that they had stolen.
Blood money.
Yep.
I just don't know how people can agree to do this.
It is so wild to me.
Just for some money.
Mm-hmm.
When they already had money.
Yeah. Police arrested both Steve Champagne and Chris Bashir for the murders of Tricia and Kevin Whitaker and began proceedings against them.
And did Steve get some kind of deal for coming totally clean?
He does get a little bit of a deal.
Okay.
But they still don't know where to find Bart. That break would come on September 14, 2005. Detective Slott spoke with a man who would identify himself only as Mike Jones, very obviously a phony name. The caller knew Bart was in Mexico because Bart had paid him $3,000 to drive him there. The caller was later identified as Rogelio Rios, Bart's co-worker at Hotel Icon, and he was willing to turn Bart in for the $10,000 reward that the police had offered.
I love that.
Good thing somebody else was greedy too, or else he actually might not have been turned in for the reward money.
That is a terrifying thought. He could be living his little life in Mexico.
Yeah, because up until that person came forward, they had no idea where he was.
No, he could have a bunch of little Barts running around by now.
Mm-hmm. I love that the money got him in the end. Investigators learned that Bart was living with Rios' father in Mexico. During his time in Mexico, Bart met a woman at church, and when they began dating, he was offered a job at her family's furniture store. He was finally tracked down and arrested without incident when he appeared for a so-called job interview at a Monterey restaurant on September 22, 2005. Bart had deceived all of the people in his new life as well. He was a good worker, charming and friendly, and apparently had a way with the ladies. He had developed a whole new persona in Mexico as an Afghanistan war vet who had survived a surprise attack. That's how he explained the scar from his bullet wound.
So in this made-up scenario, he was both the hero and the victim.
Mm-hmm.
He's living his best little dream.
He is. He told people that he was an only child and that his mother was a prostitute, that he had never been loved by his family, that they had only ever given him just money.
What a dirtbag.
Yeah, that doesn't seem like he was really torn up about what he had just done to his brother and his mother.
Even just starting a whole new life, I don't know how a person can kill your brother and your mother, almost kill your father, and then just flee to Mexico and start living your little dream.
Well, and what really just irked me was that his chosen story to make up just further disrespected his mother's memory by saying that she was a prostitute, she never loved me. He didn't have to make up that story.
Right. Even that his brother didn't exist.
Right.
He could have said, oh, my parents died in a car accident when I was young. There's so many lies that you could have told that did not paint them as dirtbags.
But those weren't the stories that he came up with. He had to come up with one that just further desecrated them. Thankfully, the police took him into custody. They worked with Mexican officials, they got him across the border, and they arrested him.
Good, because I think a lot of people think, oh, you just flee to Mexico and you're safe. That's it. You just don't come back into the States and you'll never be arrested.
No, Mexican authorities worked with the police in Texas.
Awesome.
When Kent saw his son for the first time behind bars, Bart just said, quote, "Dad, I'm just so sorry. I'm sorry for all of it. It's all my fault." Kent said that that was the first time he believed 100% that his son was a cold-blooded killer. Up until that point, he was still trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, even after he fled.
Oh.
Bart told his father that to show his remorse, he was going to make things as quick as possible for everyone in regards to his punishment. In December of 2005, Fort Bend District Attorney John Healy publicly announced that the death penalty would be sought for Bart's actions. This was against Kent's wishes. Kent said, quote, "If the state pursues the death penalty and receives it, they will kill the last surviving member of my family."
You can see how, as a father, he would feel torn.
Mm-hmm.
For us listening, we don't feel so torn.
No.
But as a father, if this was your son, yeah, you better believe you're going to have some mixed feelings about it.
Yeah.
Because he's not saying he doesn't want his son punished, but he just doesn't want him put to death.
Right. And I think he still just continued to give Bart the benefit of the doubt, which Bart totally didn't deserve.
No.
Because despite his claims that he would be a good little dirtbag and take his punishment so that court proceedings would be easier for his dad, Bart acts like a spoiled child. He complains about his representation, that they're not big enough guns, and he's upset about the fact that nobody was offering him a plea deal, even though he wasn't putting anything on the table.
No, you got caught.
Yeah.
You were extradited back to the United States, you little dirtbag.
Yeah. It's not like he's making confessions or anything like that. He felt that the prosecutor had it out for him. So again, we see this kind of victim mentality.
Yep.
It did kind of seem to ring a little bit true. But then again, that's the prosecutor's job to have it out for dirtbags, right?
I was just going to say, he's not doing his job if he's not going after you.
Yeah.
You want him to hold your hand?
Mm-hmm. He just thought he should be treated special. The prosecutor believed that Bart was a cold-blooded, unfeeling dirtbag that thought he was smarter than everybody else. He believed that Bart just wanted to see if he could get away with the perfect crime and score a little cash on the side while doing it. The prosecutor's perception of Bart was further fueled by a Christmas card the District Attorney Fred Fleckman received from him in 2006. Bart had written in the Christmas card that Fred should keep his family in mind during the holiday season.
What? Like
Yes.
as a threat?
Yeah, Bart tried to deny this poorly veiled threat, but it did make the district attorney a little nervous knowing Bart's ability to talk other people into doing his dirty work. In the end, the card was used as more evidence to prove that Bart belonged on death row.
Yeah, but he was going to be dangerous.
Mm-hmm. He's still threatening people.
And it takes a lot of nerve to threaten the person who's coming after you.
Mm-hmm.
This is giving me Drew Peterson vibes.
It's just so crazy.
It's not going to work out for you, honey.
No. The death penalty was not pursued for Chris, the actual shooter. It was felt that Chris and Steve would not have committed this crime had it not been for Bart. Chris Brashear pleaded guilty and received a life sentence with eligibility for parole after 30 years, and Steve Champagne received 15 years in prison for his role in the crime. Both said that they had been motivated by money that Bart promised them.
They're little dirtbags, too.
They are. There's no getting around it.
Yeah, no amount of money warrants taking someone's life.
No, not at all. Steve did receive a slightly lighter sentence because he agreed to testify against Bart. He would give the jury a first-person view of what it was like to be manipulated by him and fall for his lies, and how someone could be talked into murder. Steve told the jury that Bart studied those around him, watching their interactions and identifying things about them. Then he would use what he learned to manipulate them. Bart was always well-dressed and well-spoken and was intelligent when making small talk. He frequently told Steve and others at first that he was an orphan and that Steve was like the brother he never had. This was all to gain sympathy and foster a relationship that afforded Bart loyalty and protection. Chris admired Bart and began to mimic him. How he acted and how he dressed, he was drawn to Bart's charm. There were some rumors that Bart and Chris might have been romantically involved, but I couldn't really find a good source for that.
Okay.
But there were some people that thought that's how Bart had convinced Chris to be the shooter.
That he'd be more easily manipulated that way.
Yes.
For sure, if that was true.
But I couldn't find a good source to say yes, it had. In late summer of 2003, Bart started talking to both these men about how great it would be to have financial security. At the time, both Chris and Steve were struggling financially. Once Bart committed them to the idea, he then started joking to Chris and Steve that all of them could obtain money easily from his family if they were to die or be killed. All of it hypothetical. Doing everything in jest, he was able to gauge their reactions. At first, it seemed like just a morbid joke that he had. As time passed, though, they became more entrenched, deeper and deeper into this plot that he was hypothetically planning.
And the more they talked about it, the less absurd it began to sound.
Right. And when Chris and Steve raised concerns about this murderous plan, Bart threatened them, saying that they would already be implicated because they already knew so much about his plans. So they might as well go along with it and get the money.
Or go to the police and tell them what you know.
Yeah.
There's always a better choice there, boys.
So true.
And do you know how much money he was even offering them?
No, it was all very vague. They knew that he was getting somewhere between $1 million and $1.5 million from his inheritance.
How much is that actually in today's money? Almost 2.4 million today.
Okay, so he could have given them 500,000 each?
Yeah, because it's 2,352,000 and change. Yeah, he could have easily given them $500,000 and still had quite a bit left.
Right. Still though, 500,000 is not a lot to kill somebody for.
But I can see how in today's money, 2.3, almost $2.4 million would feel like, oh, that will solve all my problems.
That's a draw.
Yeah. But there's no amount of money that is worth killing somebody.
No, and it didn't even sound like there was a definite amount that they had agreed upon. He was just promising them money.
He probably would have given them each like $5,000 and been like, thanks, boys.
Yeah, it was so crazy.
Because really at that point, what could they do? If they tell on him, they're telling on themselves.
Mm-hmm.
You could totally screw someone over that way.
Oh, and I'm sure that was probably part of his master plan. It just didn't get that far.
Yeah, because he's selfish.
He is selfish. And at one point, Bart even threatens Steve's mom if he didn't go through with the plans.
Oh my.
Yeah. So it sounded like there was a little bit of pressure for them to go along with him. Once they're committed, Bart started dehumanizing his family, and that made it easier for them to contemplate the murder further.
You would have to.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you could do that in your right mind.
He purposely did that so that they would be okay with going along with it, so that they wouldn't be as conflicted.
So telling them lies about how horrible they are.
Mm-hmm.
Ugh.
Steve tells the jury that they had planned to carry out their plot in September of 2003, but Kent had canceled dinner plans on the chosen night, and the plan had to be postponed.
Oh.
Most people, including Kent, were shocked to learn just how many times Bart had devised different plans to kill his family.
And how horrific to learn that later, because he probably felt bad for canceling dinner on his son, and then to have that realization that actually spared my wife and my son's life for a time being by canceling that dinner.
Yeah, and his own.
Oh.
Bart was planning this for well over 2 years. That's a lot of time to change your mind. And instead, he just let his hatred grow and came up with more reasons for why his family was to blame for his failures in life.
Oh, that's just so evil.
Mm-hmm. And I think the greed was growing as well, because as each plan to kill was abandoned for the next, the lure of his family's wealth becomes more and more part of the discussion with the people he's trying to talk into murdering his family.
Right.
I believe Bart had convinced himself that he was the person most qualified to handle his family's sizable fortunes.
Well, of course, he'd be the only one.
Mm-hmm. So I don't believe his motives have originally started with the money, but I think they are a big part of it by the end.
Yeah, it would play a factor. The more he fixated on wanting to kill them, the sweeter the prize of that money became.
Mm-hmm.
This giant cherry on top. So terrible.
Bart's trial lasted 6 days. At the end of it, the jury deliberated less than 2 hours, returning a verdict everyone was expecting: guilty of capital murder.
Yes.
The sentencing part of the trial was a little bit more tricky than determining guilt. The prosecution pushed for the death penalty, but Kent was sticking by his son, taking the stand, fighting for a life sentence instead. The defense argued that if Kent, the only survivor and the person most affected by the crime, did not want the death penalty, then how could anyone else be for it? In a surprising, or not so surprising move, Bart took the stand during the sentencing part of the trial, and his cavalier manner did not do him any favors with the jury. When the trial first opened, Bart had refused to speak, even to stand and enter a plea, forcing the judge to enter a not guilty plea on his behalf. Because he had refused to do this, that's why the trial had to happen in the first place, putting his dad through more agony and turmoil as he relived the deaths of his family.
Oh, when he had promised his dad, I'm going to make this quick.
Yeah.
And then act like a spoiled little brat.
Yeah, because he said he didn't want to admit guilt.
Oh, he reminds me of the little toddler who goes limp when you're trying to put them in their car seat.
Yes, that's what he did.
Yeah.
And then because he did that, a not guilty plea had to be entered by the judge, and they had to go through the whole trial. His poor father.
Yes, and to still stand by him.
Yeah.
Although sometimes I think the more severe punishment is a life in jail with no parole.
Yeah, some people would view it that way. During the sentencing hearing, Bart tried his manipulation tactics, admitting guilt first, and then pleading his case as a victim in his life. He claimed that he always felt that the love his family extended was conditional on a standard that he could never reach. He claimed that he was now a changed person and that he was remorseful, saying that his dad was now his best friend. Bart even sported some tears during his time on the stand. When the lawyer asked why he was now showing some emotion when he hadn't through the whole rest of the trial, Bart blamed it all on the horrible memories that he had been reliving. And then he challenged the prosecutor, asking him if he didn't think a person could be sorry for something he did. The prosecutor fired back at him, quote, "No, I think they can be sorry, Mr. Whitaker, but I don't think you are. I think you are sorry you got caught, and now you're figuring out how to get out of the death penalty."
Good for him. And I think he probably truly felt like, oh, my dad's my best friend right now. But I think because all the focus was on him, he wasn't competing with his mom for his dad's love or his younger brother who he felt outshone him for his father's attention.
Right. And let's face it, in the middle of this murder trial, he's become the center of everybody's attention.
Yes. Ooh, this guy.
The deciding factor for the jury to issue the death sentence was to determine if they felt Bart would or could be a future threat to others. Bart claimed that he would not be because the only people he had ever hated were his immediate family.
Baloney.
Well, I don't think that's an overly comforting rationalization. If he could justify killing people he hated, and he could hate the people that cared and loved for him, who would be safe from Bart if his hatred was ever to get out of hand again?
Exactly. That is a good point because his family gave him no reason for him to hate them.
Yeah, it was a crazy rationalization.
People like this, I would like to see them actually have a hard time in life. He had everything handed to him, every opportunity, and still, woe is me, I'm this little victim, where other people can live through so many horrific and horrible things and be a contributing, wonderful member of society.
Yeah, they don't turn into dirtbags.
No, can actually look outward and help others because of the experiences that they've had.
Mm-hmm. During the sentencing hearing, no one brought up the fact that Bart had told police after his capture that he found it easy to convince others to kill for him. Later, Bart would say that it was easier for people to believe that there was only one monster in this story, but actually all three of them were comfortable with the idea of murder. And I felt like this was like a child trying to share the blame instead of taking full responsibility for his actions. He's like, well, they threw snowballs too, you know.
Great.
It was so crazy. Bart's callousness in justifying the murders was unsettling, even if he hadn't been the one to pull the trigger. The jury had heard testimony from Stephen previously that before Bart took off to Mexico, while he was living with his father, he met with Steve at the Woodlands restaurant in February of 2004, and he had told Steve that the job wasn't finished. Then had a discussion about another attempt to kill Kent.
No way.
Yep. That all comes out during the trial.
Oh my gosh. Shut the front door.
Yep.
What? And his father hears this.
And his father hears this at the trial.
How much heartbreak can he put one man through?
I don't know.
Honestly, this man that is giving you
every opportunity for a second chance.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's giving you everything, and he's extending this olive branch after you've murdered his wife and his son.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you ungrateful little turd.
Yeah, and then he finds out that he was still willing to try and kill him for the rest of the money.
But at the same time, oh, he's my best friend.
Yeah.
What a weasel.
In March of 2007, the jury decided after 10 hours that Bart Whitaker was still a danger to others and that he would be put to death. He was sent to Allen B. Polinsky Unit, where he was condemned to live in solitary confinement in Livingston, Texas. I actually got a little chuckle out of that because how ironic that death row is in Livingston.
Oh, yeah, I guess.
It's like, oh, that's kind of not fitting, but okay.
Should be in a place called Death Valley or something.
For years, Kent lobbied the state to commute Bart's sentence. Still.
What a man. Wow.
Even knowing all of what his son had planned to do. Through appeals, appearances on 2020, 48 Hour Mystery, and Oprah, newspaper and magazine articles, and writing an autobiography about the murders, Kent worked tirelessly to try and get his son's sentence commuted. Kent stood by his son and his commitment to himself to forgive the one responsible for Tricia and Kevin's murders. Despite all of his work, Bart's date of execution was set for February 22nd, 2018 at 6 p.m. The week before the execution, Kent still had not given up and made one final appeal to the Texas Parole Board for Pardons and Paroles. He tells them of the changes that he has seen in his son. While in prison, Bart has completed 2 college degrees and been a model citizen. Bart has encouraged other prisoners to further their own education. Of the 57 letters that were written on Bart's behalf, 2 guards had described him as a calming influence among the death row inmates. And that statement made me think of, who was the killer that you covered that was analyzing him?
Oh, it was Herbert Mullen.
Yes.
Yes. And the co-ed killer.
But that's what it made me think of. He's this super calming influence because he's psychoanalyzing everybody and telling them what their problems are and how they can fix them. And
oh my goodness.
Bart even started a blog called Minutes Before 6. It's a site for prisoners to post essays and short stories to aid in their therapy and self-discovery. The site averages 40,000 hits a month. He called it Minutes Before 6 because 6 p.m. is always the time in Texas when executions occur.
Oh, that's just what I was going to ask you, if his execution was set for 6 p.m.
It was, yeah. To Kent, Bart had changed. He conceded that he didn't know if the changes were completely genuine, but he believed that Bart should be given the chance to prove it was genuine. Kent also told the board how the execution would further victimize him. Bart's lawyers argued that the penalty was too severe, considering that the actual shooter didn't get a death sentence.
But honestly, at this point, regardless of how you feel about the death penalty, my heart just goes out for Kent.
Oh, absolutely it does.
If this is this father's wish, I almost feel like stay the execution just for this man. Give him a win.
Yeah.
Regardless of what Bart deserves.
Mm-hmm. I feel the same way.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah. 2 days before the execution, in a stunning judgment, one rarely made in Texas, the board recommended clemency. Most were shocked, but honestly, listening to Kent's arguments for saving his son's life, they are so emotional and convincing. His willingness to forgive his son is so inspiring. The final decision to commute the death sentence to a life sentence was left up to Governor Abbott of Texas. The date of the execution came, and there was no word from the governor. Kent and Bart spent their last visit together that morning because Bart didn't want anyone there for the execution. Kent wanted to be there, but instead he waited in another room. Bart ate his last meal of chicken enchiladas, rice and beans, and vegetables. 40 minutes before the lethal injection was to be administered, a call came from the governor's office that said that Bart's sentence would be commuted to life in prison.
Wow, that came down to the wire.
It did. Part of me wonders if he did it on purpose.
Yeah, just to let Bart sweat.
Mm-hmm.
It put Kent through more emotional turmoil, but I'm glad that they made Bart sweat that out.
Yeah.
They should have waited till he was strapped into the gurney before they did it.
That would have been fitting, hey?
Yes.
In a press release, the governor said, quote, "In just over 3 years as governor, I have allowed 30 executions. I have not granted a commutation of a death sentence until now, for reasons I here explain. The murders of Mr. Whitaker's mother and brother are reprehensible. The crimes deserve severe punishment for the criminals who killed them. The recommendation of the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles, and it is my action on it, ensures Mr. Whitaker will never be released from prison. The decision of the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles is supported by the totality of the circumstances in this case. The person who fired the gun that killed the victim did not receive the death penalty, but Mr. Whitaker, who did not fire the gun, did get the death penalty. That factor alone may not warrant commutation for someone like Mr. Whitaker, who recruited others to commit murder. Additional factors make the decision more complex. Mr. Whitaker's father, who survived the attempt on his life, passionately opposes the execution of his son. Mr. Whitaker's father insists that he would be victimized again if the state put to death his last remaining immediate family member. Also, Mr. Whitaker voluntarily and forever waived any and all claims to parole in exchange for a commutation of his sentence from death to life without the possibility of parole. Moreover, the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles unanimously voted for the commutation. The totality of these factors warrants the commutation of Mr. Whitaker's death sentence to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Mr. Whitaker must spend the remainder of his life behind bars as punishment for this heinous crime.
It's a very interesting scenario because the victim is also the dirtbag's family. So I feel like Kent's feelings on the execution actually does hold merit.
Oh, I think 100% they do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Upon learning of the decision, Bart, then 38, made the statement, quote, "I'm thankful for the decision, not for me, but for my dad. Any punishment that I would have or will receive is just, but my dad did nothing wrong." Kent said of his fight to spare his son's life, quote, "The first night in the hospital, I forgave everyone who was involved in this. It is a gift of God that allows me to do this. I think he gave me this gift so that when I found out it was my son, it would be a legitimate forgiveness." He still says that while he thinks his son has changed, that he can't be 100% sure, and admits that, quote, "I truly can't read his heart. I thought I'd read his heart all those years." He says that he's moved past trying to analyze Bart to figure out if he has changed, saying, quote, "My love for him and my forgiveness for him isn't based on him changing."
Wow, that is remarkable.
Kent has remarried and is the co-director of Bigger Picture Ministries. He shares his story, inspiring others to forgive and move past hurt to healing. Bart is currently imprisoned at the Ellis Unit in Huntsville, Texas. He now goes by his first name, Thomas. It was something he announced in his first post on Minutes Before 6. He introduced the site by writing that it will, quote, "stand as evidence for something that we all know in our cores. Beneath our politics or our prejudice, people change. They grow." He vows to become more transparent about who he is, writing, quote, "This is for you, Dad. The masks are off. Those of you who knew me as Bart, sorry. Bart is dead. Good riddance." He aims now to shape a new life as Thomas. He continues to believe that he was born with the wrong wiring, but he maintains that he can change his behavior even with wrong wiring, saying that, quote, "You just have to work out a different way at arriving at the same destination other people get to naturally." A simple example. Say you see a poor wretch on the sidewalk and feel the need to help this person. I can arrive at that same action, giving money or a coat, by designing a set of ethical rules. In this case, that in order for me to maintain my superiority, I am required to help those less fortunate. Whereas your action would depend on empathy, mine would depend on an internal rule, but the result would be the same. And I thought that is such an interesting way to look at life.
Ah, that speaks volumes as to how he perceives everything around him. And I have to say, I don't know if I buy that he's a changed man, because his whole life he just learned to be whoever everybody wanted him to be.
Exactly.
I have to play this part now of this remorseful prisoner.
Mm-hmm. If he has changed, I'm happy for his father. But I can't help but wonder if he has just once again reinvented a new persona, and if that persona will breed resentment again. In his writings, I still see undertones of that victim mentality and an attempt to justify his actions and manipulate how others see him. And that is the case of the self-serving, manipulative dirtbag Thomas Bartlett Whitaker, the narcissist that blamed those who loved him the most for bringing him into the world when he couldn't live up to his own self-created images of grandeur.
Wow. What a case, Melissa.
It was so interesting to research because he has posted so many things about how he views the world and how he is now governing his life, because he freely admits he does not feel anything. He doesn't feel empathy towards people at all, but that he's convinced he can be a good person by giving himself specific rules that he has to follow.
Yeah, I'm not buying it. Sorry, I'm not.
Well, that's a psychopath.
Yeah. I looked up if people who are psychopaths can feel empathy, and I thought this was really interesting. It says people with psychopathic traits often struggle with emotional empathy, but they're usually adept at cognitive empathy and can use this to manipulate people, which describes him 100%.
That's exactly what he's saying in that quote.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm not going to feel sorry for the guy because he's cold, but my brain can tell me that, oh, socially, I should give him my jacket.
Yeah.
Even to call him a wretch just proves how he's feeling.
Mm-hmm. And that's why he could view his family so coldly.
Right. And why he's such a master manipulator. And that's why I think even his father, in his quote when he said, I don't know if he's changed or not, but I am just going to forgive regardless. And what a beautiful example he is setting to the rest of the world. Most of us couldn't do that.
No, not at all.
Not to that extent.
Not towards a dirtbag like Bart.
Yeah. But that's tough when the dirtbag is your son.
Yeah.
But next week, our dirtbag will be someone's daughter.
And we hope you join us for that one.
Until then,
See ya.
bye. Okay, what's on your paper?
It's just random stuff. It's just everywhere.
I love it. Melissa's brain works twice as hard as the rest of us, so she needs paper to be able to write on.
Or it's just twice as slow, so I need to take notes to keep up.
No, we're saying twice as fast.
Why did I have... Suburban. It's an upscale. Don't laugh, Christy, because it just makes me want to laugh. Okay. It's an upscale suburb.
Wait, sorry. I
actually got it that time.
But I was like yawning and my boobs touched the mic.
You always do this kind of stuff when I'm actually not tongue-tied anymore.
Well, because I think you're going to keep being tongue-tied. And I'm like, okay, I got time. Let her figure it out. Can I say that?
Yeah, you can say that.
Okay.
His duality in his life. Bart's duality in his life. His duality in the life.
Is duality where?
Just give me a sec.
As soon as you say an age, I'm like, I know they're dying.
Yeah.
Because I do the same thing.
It's true. It's just what we do. We want you to know how many years were taken. The crime scene got even more peculiar. The crime scene got even more peculiar. The crime scene got even more strange when they found... I knew you were going to laugh.
I was like, she's going to get it. She's going to get it. And then you're like, strange. I'm like, she got it. She knows that one.
The crime scene got even more peculiar.
Sorry, say that again.
Ah,
I know.
I know. And I got it. The murder of Mr. Whitaker. The murder of Mr. Whitaker's.
Whitaker.
I've been calling them that the whole time in my head. I had to practice
Whitaker
so many
is such
times.
a fun word too. Whitaker. Would he take her to the prom? Would he take her to the movies?
Whitaker. The murders of Mr. Whitaker's what? The murders of Mr. Whitaker's what? No, not wife. It's mother. Bah. The murders of Mr. Whitaker's wife. No, freaking.
Okay, we're getting to a whole Freud thing now. This is his wife and his mother.
This is why I cannot do anything live.
One day.
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.